Hi, I'm Marc Freedman. I'm the founder and co-CEO of CoGenerate. We're an organization that's focused on bringing older and younger people together to forge bonds, bridge divides, and co-create a better future for all generations. And I'm so happy to be kicking off the third in our webinar series for the project Music Across Generations, which is focused on the power of music to bring older and younger people together in partnership and in connection. And I'm so happy to be doing it at the end of what I know for most of us has been a very stressful week. It's great to have this community and to focus on an enormously hopeful, insightful, wise, and powerful film. Really, for me, something that shows the way music can be a connecting force between people across age and other difference. This series is sponsored by the Eisner Foundation. The first in the series was a portrait of the Heart of LA's intergenerational chorus, big band, and orchestra. And I am also deeply honored and so excited to be talking today with the filmmaker, Ben Proudfoot, a two-time Academy Award winner, who won the Academy Award this year for The Last Repair Shop, about his film, my favorite music documentary with generational themes of all time, A Concerto Is a Conversation. This is the 12th time I've seen A Concerto Is a Conversation, and I'm moved deeply by it every time. And I'm moved deeply by the chance to talk about it with Ben Proudfoot, the director, along with Chris Bowers. About 6 months ago, I got an email from Sherry Lansing, the former head of Paramount Pictures, who was a longtime board member at CoGenerate, and she was writing to introduce me to Ben. She didn't know that that week I had written an article saying that for all the attention the Holdovers was getting, I think AARP designated it as the best intergenerational film that was up for an Oscar this year, that the best intergenerational film was actually The Last Repair Shop, and that I was already a fan of Ben's work, but I hadn't seen A Concerto As a Conversation before. And that ended up being a revelation for me, along with so many of your other films, Ben, including That's My Jazz, The Queen of Basketball. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
An honor to be here, and thank you. Thanks for shedding a light on Concerto and this story, which I haven't actually seen the film in a long time, and it was just amazing. Chris looks a lot younger. Yeah, it's a sweet memory thinking about making that film.
When you see it now after the hiatus, do you think, oh, I wish I had done this differently? Or
oh yeah, I'm like, oh, that was a ham-handed transition. But you also at the same time you think, oh, that was actually pretty good. That was a good idea, but you also remember, how tough it was to, which lenses we chose and why, all the background information of why we, chose different things. So there's a lot. It always brings a lot of memories up to watch a film that I haven't seen in a while.
Well, I want to ask you about even the lenses, but first, the New York Times used to have a 5-question feature that they did with authors when a book came out. And the question I always loved and went to first was, how did this book turn out to be different than the one you set out to write? And I want to ask you that about this film.
Yeah, well, very much so. This project started as calling Chris and seeing if he would do a 2-minute profile about the concerto that he was writing for the Walt Disney Concert Hall. It was a basic behind the scenes, Chris laboring away at the piano, figuring out how to write this concerto. I had read that he was putting this on, and I thought it would be a good short thing. We were working with the LA Phil. And I thought this would be great. So I called him and he said, yeah, come on over and we'll talk about it. And when I went over to his house, that morning, he happened to be wearing a full suit and tie. And I asked him why. And he said he had just come from a dedication ceremony for his grandfather, who the city had named this entire block the Bowers Square in South LA. And I said, "Oh, what's that story?" And he told me, and how his grandfather had hitchhiked across the country, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, "That's the movie. That's a much better, you know." And Chris said, "Yeah, I've always wanted to." And then from there, it became very immediately. It was like, okay, we could do a double, what we call a double interrotron, which is that eye contact method of looking at each other and having eye contact, which you see in the movie. And it was just, that's where the collaboration began. So it started out as something very small, and it became more or less a tribute to Chris's grandfather that we made.
And to their relationship. I keep thinking that well, I was choked up so many times, but his Horace Sr.'s comment at the end, I hope I had a little something to do with it.
Yeah.
Why
One
did
moment,
you
yeah.
the scene that that grabs me every time is Horace's glasses fogging up.
Yes.
What tell us about that, and what does that scene mean to you?
Well, we were there in that space, which is such a lived-in space, that dry cleaning factory on premises. And we were there, and he was showing us how the steamer works, with sort of this bag that fills with hot air, and this big blast of air came out and fogged his glasses, and they started laughing. And I just thought, man, that there is something really beautiful about that moment. And it just struck me as, I all four of my grandparents are gone. And it struck me as the kind of moment that you remember, that you share with a parent or a grandparent. That's a simple moment that strikes you as delightful, that tickles you in some way. And that's what it reminded me of, is like, that's the kind of moment that you'll remember forever, about your relationship. And so we tried to capture it in the movie, and I think it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And it did make me think of the kind of unconditional love that exists between grandparents and grandchildren.
Yeah.
It's blind. And that
Yeah, I mean, I think there is that layer there. Yeah, for sure.
the other scene that I always think about and love seeing again is the steamer and the Steinway, the pedals. Yeah, where
The
Horace is
match cut. Yeah.
yeah.
It just occurred to me. I think, yeah, you go there and Horace is like, this is what I did for X many years. And I'm examining it visually, and he's showing what he's doing. Very, you could tell that he was a master at this machine. And it just struck me the similarity between the two machines, right? He's there doing this, and there's a pedal, and it just struck me, wow, these are very similar, and very different machines. And that, as a filmmaker, you're always looking for the images and sort of symbols that speak to the greater story. And with this story, it's all about the journey, basically, that, like, the journey from the steamer to the piano in the concert hall. Like, how did it get from this to this? And that image just says so much about that, about the stark difference between those two machines, but also the stunning similarities between them. And that's why that moment is just magic. That cut just sums up the movie in that one moment. And you're always looking for that magic as a filmmaker.
And it ties so much into the title of the concerto, For a Younger Self, which is such a bridge between time. That felt like something you can't make up. The fact that
Yeah, and he made those were all decisions that he had made before we ever even talked about it. I mean, the concerto itself was mostly written by the time I called Chris. And the parts that are in the movie are beautiful, but it's a much, it's now released, and I encourage everybody, if they're interested in Chris's music, to to go and seek out for a younger self. It's a brilliant concerto and super virtuosic. I mean, it's an amazing piece of music.
And it made me think about how all of the paths that Horace had traveled had made it possible for sort of this version of his younger self, in a way, Chris, to have the opportunities that he had, and the way the generations are intertwined and interwoven and interdependent.
Yeah, and how one little thing 50 years ago, can have this enormous ripple effect into the future. That was very sort of present. Like, what if he had gone to a different city? Or what if a different dry cleaner had called him back and he hadn't met Chris's grandmother, or like, there's just so many things like that, that I thought, man, that's amazing.
How long did it, well, how do you get all of that into 13 minutes without it seeming rushed or hurried or crammed?
Well, I mean, very carefully. I mean, it all happens in the edit. Obviously, there's many hours of work that we couldn't include. And so you're looking for highly layered scenes that have dimension to them and are elegant representations of multiple things that create a complex idea. You are, relying on images and sound and music to very quickly and efficiently relay complex ideas. You are depending on pre-existing notions and expectations of the audience that you can use and play off of in order to not have to explain or establish those things in the film itself. So as a short documentarian, you are kind of peddling in all kinds of stuff that's external to the movie. And you're also really, really looking for images, moments, scenes, pauses, pieces of music, etc., that are loaded with a lot of information so that we can get we can use your full brain and bandwidth during those 13 minutes. So you just feel like you've lived a lifetime with the Bowers family by the end of it.
Why did you decide to make short documentaries? Did you think you were going to make long documentaries when you started?
Actually, no. I had no interest in documentary film at all. I wanted to make scripted narrative features, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And, then that led me to film school, and I studied Frank Capra and John Ford and, so many filmmakers that inspired me. But really it was, I get asked this question a lot because people go, why short documentaries? Don't you want to make a real movie? And, I think the thing that really draws me to the short documentary is that it is the most democratic form of cinema, right? I don't have to ask anyone's permission to go make a short documentary. I don't have to raise millions of dollars. I don't have to waste 10 years of my life pitching it around town to get it done. I'm built to tell stories and make movies. And in absence of winning the lottery, the short documentary is just something that's like within a scope and scale that, we at our company can do. And so I can make, 10, 15, 20 movies a year about all kinds of subjects. And I don't have to, get the approval of a major studio, which is very difficult. There's not the same kind of fiduciary duty. And very importantly, I can use the internet to distribute these films, and a lot more people get to be engaged by the work. And also, times are changing in terms of what people are interested in. The Last Repair Shop has enormous viewership, more than most feature documentaries that were produced last year, this year. So there's something that's changing in our society. And if you kind of boil it down as a filmmaker of like, I want to tell fantastic stories that wouldn't otherwise get told through the medium of cinema to millions of people, nowhere in there does it say that the thing has to be 2 hours. That's a vestige of the past.
Let me ask you another question. After I saw Last Repair Shop, I then went and rummaged around and watched a concerto. I saw That's My Jazz. And then I watched The Queen of Basketball, another film that you won an Academy Award for. And I know you have your Breakwater has a new film that just got released this week,
Yeah.
Motorcycle Mary.
Yes.
So many of these films feature elders who are pioneering. Mary McGee pioneering in the motorcycle racing arena. Horace Bowers, his entrepreneurship. Lucy Harris. And in many ways, you've got them looking, these elders looking back at their younger self for a younger
Mm.
self. Am I just seeing that because I'm inclined in that, or has that become a theme in a lot of your movie making?
You know, I see it now that you say it. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of times as a storyteller, like I don't examine that about myself or the films that I make, but clearly, I mean, yeah, there's a thread there. Um, why? I think I'm just kind of like thirsty for context, you
Mm.
know? I grew up in a, you know, my dad was a lawyer, my mom is a sociology professor, and both very curious people and just trying to, you know, figure out, I've just been trying to figure out how the world is the way it is since I could first formulate an idea. And I think the best way that I've found to do that is to talk to people who were in the room, you know, or who were around then. Um, and and I'm also not much of a reader.
Mm.
So the most impactful moments of my life have been often watching movies or conversations I've had with people. And I think a lot of these films are kind of like taking a conversation that I've had with somebody really interesting who has a great story and turning it into a film that replicates that conversation to the audience. Um, and for me, that is how I've come to understand how the world works and my position in it and what I can do and all those things. So I think that's to me the great value, and I think we miss out on that a lot in our society, and we discard incredibly valuable information and insight from past generations and generations that have more experience than us. You know, probably because we're, you know, young people are apt to sort of throw everything in the trash and start over again. There's something exciting about that. I don't know what it is, but it's a mistake. And so I like making movies that says, well, you know, actually maybe the essential information we need is right under our nose.
Mm.
That's, I think, a very compelling idea to me.
Are you still thinking about making a film about your father?
You know, I maybe every film I make is about my father.
Ah, ah, ah.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's hard to escape who you are, right? So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I kind of follow my nose on different things, but there's a lot of stuff that is definitely unfinished business, I think, in the story of our relationship that seems to find its way into the films.
I'm going to turn to some of the questions from the audience, but even before I do that, I'll just read you some. The Last Repair Shop is so moving and incredible. I've told everybody about it, and they are so grateful. We have dozens
Thank
of
you.
comments along those lines, and we'll send you these afterwards. But here's one that's just come in. How has winning an Oscar impacted your ability to raise funds or find partners, collaborators for your other docs?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it has, and in some ways it hasn't. Um, you know, as of today, the short documentary as an industry is still nascent, right? It's a market that we've been working on building, and there's not that many other people who are, you know, helping us. There are some, but it's not a very big group of people. It makes sense to me that there needs to be a bigger market. So the people who are financially supporting us are mostly believers in that grander vision, and that the short documentary is ascendant as a form of storytelling, or they truly deeply believe in that the story has to be told, and there's an element of philanthropy to the support of the films. And so if you think about, either one of those things, that what the Oscar is really is more of a way to reach a huge audience with a short documentary. Is that, if you can get an Oscar nomination, forget about the win. If you can get an Oscar nomination, a lot of people will watch your movie just by virtue of that. And that's our greatest struggle, is how do we get a whole bunch of people to see this important story? That's why we're so interested in that path. And so I think having won, a couple of times in this category probably gives greater confidence that, that the movie will be good, yes, but also that people will see it. Which is kind of the great question, is like, okay, we can make a movie, but tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, which is often a struggle in the short documentary world, about how do you make sure people are paying attention, which we've spent a lot of time trying, to figure out and solve.
One of the people, I was scrolling through the comments, and they raised the line of when Horace is asking Chris about where did he go to school, and he says Juilliard. Let's go, whatever.
Yeah, and he's like, oh yeah, whatever it is in New York, yeah.
Tell I know, apropos of that last question, didn't the LA Times shut down that division that funded The Last Repair Shop even before it won the Oscar? Am I getting that right?
So we independently financed The Last Repair Shop. The arrangements we made with distribution was oriented around distribution, marketing and distribution. They're largely non-financial. So that was the big, contribution that we needed, that we couldn't do ourselves. We could make a movie, but how are we going to get it out to everybody else? So Searchlight Pictures and the LA Times were essential to that. And yeah, surprisingly, many of the folks that we, worked with there, I think it was the day the film got nominated, they were laid off. And I think it's partly a sign of the times in terms of journalism. But I also think there are ways to that we have not explored yet at the intersection of filmmaking and journalism that are totally profitable, that have just not been explored. And I'm actually very interested in that and curious about it, and hoping that I'll get the chance to explore that in my career.
What can you tell us a little bit about that, and what ideas?
Well, I think, at least for me, I think it's the role of journalism and reporting to put pressure on people in power. And it's also the role of journalism to, remind us of who we are as a society, good and bad, room for improvement, and absolutely wonderful things. None of those things are necessarily tied to, an article in a format that we would imagine in a newspaper. Certainly not tied for print. We've realized that now, that it doesn't necessarily need to be in a paper that's delivered to our front door. And so my question is, well, why can't that same spirit be translated into documentary film? Why can't that documentary film be, on your phone? Why can't it be in a vertical format? Why, there's all these, rules that we have in place that are pretty silly. And, it's actually an interesting thing, because it does become a cross-generational issue, where you have a lot of people my age and younger who really understand how to use, video and filmmaking, but don't have the same ability in terms of how do you, what's a hook? How do you tell a story? An understanding of story structure and reporting and fact checking and, the way things are. So in theory, there should be a fantastic 1 + 1 = 3 between, trained journalists and young filmmakers who can bring the rigor and the storytelling excellence that they have to a wider audience through a new medium that our generation understands. In theory, that should be happening all over the place, but it's not. And I think it's largely because the younger generation doesn't understand or respect what they do. And they're probably scared of this and think that this is a dumbed down version of what they do. And so instead of collaborating as much as those two groups could and should, they stay separate to their own peril. And so that's my 2 cents on that subject.
I want to go back to the questions, because this one relates a little bit to what you were talking about. Do you think your films, any films, can help us to repair the division in our society?
Yes.
Say more.
You know, I beneath the skin of all the ways in which we disagree with each other is, you know, I believe, like I think most people believe, that we all have more in common than we have different in difference. And films can remind people of that. And I think to be honest, I'm really tired of rhetoric that says that, you know, because you voted you're on the opposite side of the aisle of what I believe politically, you're a worthless human being. I don't want anything to do with you. I shun you socially. I think you're a bad person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That gets us exactly nowhere. It doesn't teach anybody a lesson. It doesn't change anybody's mind. It might feel good at the time, but it's like pretty basic elementary school lesson that's no way to behave. And so I think what films can do is it can remind us of our common humanity, and help us empathize and understand and try to build ties with people that you might disagree with on things that are really important to you, and not have that undermine your basic relationship with that person. That you don't have to have your political beliefs in common to be a friend of someone, or to love them or to understand them. And that is an idea that we seem to have forgotten, that I think films can help us restore.
When we were talking before the conversation, you said that you're increasingly drawn, including in the context of the events of the past week, to lofty, audacious ideas.
Yeah.
What are some of those ideas that are on your mind these days that are drawing you?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you know, me personally, I had a really strong reaction to Elon Musk's engagement in the Trump campaign. And in particular, just remembering, you know, however many years ago, before Elon Musk became a political figure, you know, just watching the entrepreneurial endeavors that he was involved with. And as a young guy, being very excited by those, right? The idea of, you know, space travel and electric vehicles and self-driving cars and really audacious, you know, scientific advancements, and picking up where, you know, the Kennedy administration left off, and all of these things that were so exciting. And, you know, I believe in those things, right? Like, I believe in big, audacious, ambitious ideas that we could do together, all of us together as a society, optimistic ideas about, you know, a vision for the future that we can all share and that we want to engage in. And I am so upset that somehow those things, ambition, optimism, innovation, have become wrapped up with a lot of other ideas that I don't agree with. And it's like, well, if you can't be excited by those things and not agree with these other things, which is simply not true. And so what I'm interested in is how can you know, the folks who believe in progressive ideals, like myself, be more audacious in the ideas that we present and the moonshots that we get excited about, and not just incremental stuff of, you know, something that, you know, would be nice if we could do, or that seems doable, but really that excites people. You know, and you know, I'll stop short of picking one and saying, you know, we should, you know, hell with Mars, we need to go to Jupiter, you know, or whatever. But it's something that it's ideas that sort of make you say, well, that would be pretty amazing. I haven't dared to dream that that would even be possible. And I think we have gotten really engaged with, you know, getting people angry about not going a certain direction. And again, basic psychology, that's not as exciting. Not doing something is not as exciting as doing something. And I don't know exactly what those initiatives are per se. You know, I think that's kind of where I'm at right now, is like, well, what would those be, Ben? You know, if this is what you're thinking about. But I know what it feels like when I hear those ideas, and I feel like I'm seeking those, and I'm searching for those, and I'm hoping that we can come together around it. Because if you have an idea that's interesting and audacious enough, it doesn't matter what some other opposition is thinking about. That's irrelevant. Our idea is better and more interesting. Doesn't this excite you more? And I also think that's super American. You know, I'm Canadian. I'm a Canadian person who moved to the United States, but like, that's a great part of the American spirit, is big, audacious ideas that everybody says, oh, come on, that seems crazy. And then you guys do it. And then we all go, wow, I didn't know humanity could do that. That's a very inspiring part of what this country can be. And I think there's that spirit can come alive again with the right attention.
You know, I started this organization 25 years ago with a guy who was 49 years older than me. He was the person who implemented Medicare in 1965 over the opposition of the American Medical Association. He started the first campaign finance reform organization. And when he was battling for Medicare, his name was John Gardner, he had a quote. He said, "America today faces breathtaking opportunities disguised as unsolvable problems." And I was thinking about that as you were talking. You know, a lot of us on the webinar today are focused on this breathtaking opportunity that is often disguised as an unsolvable problem, which is age diversity in society. A quarter of our population in the US today is under 20, a quarter's over 60. We hear all the time about generational conflict, kids versus canes, but we think that there's a breathtaking opportunity in there. And when I see your movies, when I see your films, I see that breathtaking opportunity. When I see the stars of The Last Repair Shop and what they're doing for younger generations, or even Horace and Chris playing together at the end of that film, I see the sort of pure distilled essence of that. I'm going back to the questions, though, because a bunch of folks wanted to ask you something, and I know we only have about 10 minutes left. The first is kind of going from these audacious ideas to the more personal. Can you say more about your father as a lawyer and unpack how much your parents impacted you?
Yeah. You know, I think probably like most people, it becomes more and more clear how my parents impacted me every day. But you know, yeah, my dad was a lawyer. He passed away in 2020, and he passed away, you know, within a year of retiring. He retired, and within a year he was gone. And he was a workaholic. I mean, he just worked all the time. It was his purpose. It was his love. He loved being a lawyer. He loved, you know, defending people and getting people justice that they deserved. But, you know, kind of immediately without that opportunity, his body started to fall apart. And he was, you know, battling with cancer and MS and a number of different things. But it really made me, and it was actually a conversation with Sherry that I was having about how, you know, why do we, you know, take a person's purpose away? You know, what is the purpose of that? And I really think, that if he hadn't retired, you know, he may have squeezed out a few more years. I believe that, maybe many more years. And so that has really had me thinking. And I, you know, as a entrepreneur, as someone who, you know, kind of has an affection for things that disrupt the order, the status quo, it was very apparent to me immediately that, you know, that idea is totally accurate, which is like, why are we discarding people who have an entire lifetime worth of experiences and expertise? That makes no sense. That is not wise. And also, you know, and look, there's lots of people that I'm sure would be totally happy to, you know, retire at any age and move on to a different way of life. But there's so many people who are just, you know, built differently, and want to keep contributing and keep leading. And how do we change the narrative where you go to the top and then you turn off? Why can't there be, you know, a separate narrative that happens after a certain moment where, you know, you can still contribute at a level that you're comfortable with and help society and make sure your expertise is heard, that aligns with, you know, how you want to live your life at that moment. It really sort of struck me personally that this was it's a problem in the story of a life, of how a life should go. And also, just because you've been doing it for 50 years doesn't mean you need to be the leader either. You know, that's another tough truth that I think is hard. It's kind of like, well, I either have to be the boss or I'm going to be retired. And it's like, well, why does that need to be the case? You know, aren't there other ways to engage and advise and have roles and projects and things that aren't that? And so I'm curious about how storytelling can play into that.
When we were talking earlier, we were talking about your conversation with Chris Bowers about Concerto as a conversation and the role of the hero's journey in that film. Joseph Campbell's idea, and Horace goes on his literal journey in that.
Sure does, yeah.
But Joseph Campbell, you know, who came up with the hero's journey idea, had a wonderful quote, which is, midlife is when you get to the top of the ladder and discover it's leaning against the wrong wall. That relates to what you were just saying. You know, and apropos also of your comment, Sherry has been the chair since the beginning of a project we started called the Purpose Prize. We were giving people over the age of 60 $100,000 each for doing what essentially is their greatest work, in place of the gold watch. And during the 10-year period where we ran the Purpose Prize, there were 10,000 nominations. It was a great story contest, and you know, and we saw thousands of stories that we would have never been able to find on our own. But I wanted to switch to a more pragmatic question.
Sure.
Along with this, you know, just wave of gratitude and kudos. There's over and over again a question that's coming up, which is, how do we support your work? Does Ben have a nonprofit, or is there a way to support what he's doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two big ways that you can support my work if you're interested. If the Last Repair Shop is something that touches your heart, if providing free and freely repaired instruments to public school kids is something that gets you excited, you can go to thelastrepairshop.com. Chris and I have launched a $15 million capital campaign to both upgrade the capital facilities of the repair shop that you see in the movie, and very importantly, to create a training program for the next generation of repair people. So we are actively raising money for that through the Los Angeles Unified School District Education Foundation. And then I've just started a new foundation this year called the Vita Brevis Foundation, that Life is Short. and it's dedicated to the art form of the short documentary.
Ah,
And gathering people who are short documentarians, establishing conventions, etc. So that one doesn't have a website yet, but if you want to email me, ben@breakwaterstudios.com, if that's something that's interesting to you, that's the other way that you could support our work through nonprofit.
and if people go to Breakwater, they can see all the films that
Absolutely.
folks have made. Maybe just before we close, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Motorcycle Mary, which
Sure.
was just released and is where can people see that? And can you tell us a little bit about that film? I know you're executive producer on that.
I am, yeah, very honored to be with F1 racer Lewis Hamilton as my fellow executive producer. So it's a beautiful film by Haley Watson, the director, and Rachel Greenwald, producer, two folks we've worked with here at Breakwater. And it's a story of Mary McGee, who in the 1960s and 70s was kind of the pioneer and the first female motorcycle racer in the United States. And she was the first person, not the first woman, but the first person to complete the Baja 500. That's a 500-mile off-road motorcycle and car race solo on a motorcycle. She's the first person to accomplish that. And she kind of never got her due. And Haley made this wonderful film about her life, about her philosophy. And theirs is a beautiful intergenerational relationship too. I mean, that might be a really interesting conversation for you folks to have, but it's out now on ESPN Plus, and it's coming to Disney Plus and to YouTube as well in the next month or so.
Thank you, Ben. So wonderful to talk to you. Really, really appreciate it. We hope we can keep working with you in any way. And I've been able to wander the streets of San Francisco with Concerto Is a conversation sandwich board, accosting anybody who will talk to me. We've got one more in this webinar series of Music Across Generations. That will be on December 3rd with Tom Casciato, who does long documentaries. He just did Two American Families, which the New York Times described as a knockout documentary. There's a wonderful interview with Tom on Fresh Air from last month. Tom is also the person for the PBS NewsHour who does their music pieces. And he's my collaborator, along with our board member, Craig Hunigs, on a documentary project about the relationship between Johnny Cash and Rick Rubin, who were, Johnny Cash was 61 and Rick Rubin 28 when they came together. And this year, Rick Rubin is 61.
Wow.
About the ways generations can come together through music to do great work and also to forge deep bonds. So please keep on the lookout for information about next month's webinar. But thank you again, Ben, and we'll send you all of the love that's come through the chat about a concerto as a conversation and your work more broadly.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Marc. It's been an honor, and thanks to everybody for your great questions. And hope everybody has a good weekend.
Thanks. And before people sign off, there's a question in the that everybody's probably seeing in their screen, asking you, after this session, are you inspired to include more older and younger people in your life? Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Marc. Bye-bye.
Bye.